again at the dinner table, and I'm still not eating anything. I've got water though. I've got perfect water. Yeah, so I wanted to have this conversation because I feel like this is something that I've noticed about myself, and as you guys probably know from all these conversations, is I'm constantly thinking, and I'm always constantly trying to be more introspective, because the only person I control in this life is me, and only me. So I've opened this conversation because I want to know, like, if this is something that also relates to you as well. But it's something that I feel like is very common to get into, and we kind of don't realize how it can impact people negatively. And I really want to talk about, as it says in the title, gossiping, because I feel like sometimes we do it more than we realize. And I was thinking about this because sometimes at work, and I'm very social at work. I don't know, I'm very introverted, but for some reason I have tendencies to be very social. And I kind of feel like, I really don't want to blame it on it, but I feel like some part of it has to do with the fact that, like, if you are really into like astrology, my rising or ascending sign is Sagittarius. So even though I'm a Cancer and I'm very much like my little crab shell, I still have, apparently, like, the way I appear to other people is very social, and it's very easy for you to build connections with people in certain ways, especially if I'm dealing with like smaller groups, one-on-one. Because I interact with a lot of my coworkers individually most of the time, because I'm usually going to them because I need something from them, like I said, in a work-related way. But I have gotten into a point where I'm able to have personal conversations, you know, like non-work conversations. And sometimes, you know, we do bring things come up where it does end up talking about some other person. And I kind of look at I've been recently looking at what kinds of topics have been coming up, because there's 2 people who work in our office, and I'm sorry, this is gossiping. This is gossiping in a video about me trying to talk about the impacts of gossiping, you know. And I know we have a lot of conversations, and I have noticed that sometimes, like, our conversations with not just, and I've gotten really close to these 2 people, and we have a pretty good relationship. And I noticed that sometimes we talk about other things, and also in an office setting, I feel like sometimes you have to be careful what you're talking about, because especially like when I go see these 2 individuals, they're in an open space where everyone has their own little cubicle area. It's an open space and anyone can hear. So sometimes I've noticed that, you know, I should probably watch what I'm talking about in those areas. Because in my office, there's only 3 people. It's only 3 people in our chambers. And so it makes a big, you know, which is different. You know, and I remember there was a coworker who, of mine, she had been on vacation for a while, and I really missed her because she actually trained me. And she was telling me that she was leaving. And I remember I was talking to someone else after that. I was like, oh my gosh, Jane, believe so-and-so is leaving. And I was like, is that technically gossiping? Because I'm like, it's information that's going to get out anyway, because she's leaving in like 2 weeks, and I'm really upset about it. I really am upset about it because I love this person very much. You know, and there was a lot of things that people were bringing up. Oh yeah, I heard because such and such, the person she works for is such and such. And like I said, I'm trying to avoid the aspect of gossiping, but you know, there's a lot of things that went on in and around that particular person leaving, and which I'm not going to disclose. But when you think about it, it's like, you know, when we talk about these things, it's like we don't always think about how what we're talking about can be, how it can impact other people. And I remember talking to a supervisor of the clerks downstairs in the courthouse. I remember one time, because I use like, when I get there early, I kind of use that as like a time to kind of like get settled, and then sometimes I'll go down and I'll talk to people. You know, I kind of use it as like a social hour, so I can at least be able to interact with my coworkers outside of just going down there and asking them for something. And I remember she was telling me, she said, yeah, we're on a different schedule than you all are in the judges' chambers, because we are working from 8 to 4. And so like when you talk, we had to actually at some point early on before you got here, we had to tell like people like, hey, like you need to curb, you know, the amount of time you're coming downstairs for just personal conversations. Because their work starts at 8, and I know like the courthouse itself opens at 8:30, but their work starts at 8 o'clock. And so she was like saying, yeah, like it's just very important to be mindful of that, because in many ways, like, you know, you can be distracting them from their work. And sometimes I've noticed, like, even when I'm coming down there to ask them for information, it always takes forever because I know everybody. I'm down there all the time. And sometimes, you know, even though I'm asking for information about something, we always have unrelated conversations that ends up like in laughter. And like, you know, sometimes it's like, we'll talk about like, oh, that one person showed up to file a motion, you know, our favorite people in our favorite court cases, you know, that are very entertaining. And sometimes not in a good way, you know? And so sometimes I've had to notice like how long I'm talking to people, because sometimes when you talk to people for too long, you can say things that you really, probably shouldn't say. And my mom was telling me that one time, because I was telling her like, yeah, I am, you know, social. I love talking to people, especially at my part-time job, because I know everyone. And she's like, yeah, like, but yeah, if you talk to people too long, you can kind of bring up things that you probably shouldn't be talking about, which is, I believe is true. I believe it's absolutely true. And sometimes like I'll notice even at work, and I'm like, okay, like I've been standing here, like how it feels like I've been here like long enough. I probably should go back upstairs and do some work or something. So I've had to kind of find creative ways to get out of conversations, because I know that after a certain period of time, you can be unproductive with those conversations. So, and I just feel like, you know, like you're just, after that, it's like, well, and I get really tired with social interactions. As much as I love being social, I love people, but as an introvert, I'm like, I can only handle people for so long, you know? So, you know, and so I have to, sometimes I feel myself mentally getting exhausted, because it takes a lot of energy. Like as an introvert, it takes a lot of energy to pay attention to what people are saying and be very present into that conversation. Especially as a person who has a lot of things going on, I'm constantly trying to avoid getting like my mind wandering. It takes a lot of energy to focus on someone's conversation. That does not mean that I don't care about that person's conversation. It's just that I'm constantly, because my brain, I have so many things going on. And then also like I said, it does take mental energy to focus on what someone's talking about. And that's just in any situation. It's not just a sensitive person, but also any person. After a certain point, people can reach their limit of social interactions, you know? And so I'm like, okay, I think I need to go back upstairs, sit at my desk and be, you know, like do my work by myself, you know? So, but I realized like, you know, having to find ways to curb my social time, you know, when we're talking about things that are unrelated, because I realize I have 8 hours. My boss has expectations, and there are times where I've actually worked to have a, sort of like a schedule or routine around getting my work done. So usually, because like Fridays we have criminal and civil motion hours, and so like on Monday I come in and I write all the orders for those, and so then those are done. And then Tuesday, if any orders get rejected because they're not correct or something like that, I use Tuesdays, I call it Rejection Tuesday, and I get those orders corrected, like, oh, someone's charges were wrong, or that sentencing that you wrote, that there's the incorrect amount of time they're supposed to serve, or something like that. You know, just like or like the wrong attorney was on it. So I usually use Tuesdays to correct anything that was not, you know, that the clerks decided to reject. And then Wednesday is usually a day where we kind of prepare for our docket, our next Friday docket. And throughout the week, we might have off docket hearings where we might have a suppression hearing, we might have a pretrial conference. You know, we have all these different types of hearings in court. But in the midst of that, I have to make sure I'm getting all of my work done, preparing for the docket, because she goes through and she might say, I need this file pulled. I need you to call so-and-so to see if they, you know, all these different things. And then Thursday, I literally have nothing to do, because everything I try to get done, because my main priority is when the phones are ringing anytime throughout the week, I want to make sure I'm not distracted. It's because it is a mental thing. Like when people call and they're saying something about like, the judge said that my bond can be refunded and I can't pick this up, you know, whatever questions they may have, I am sometimes not in the best mood to really give them the best customer service, quote unquote. Even though it's not really customer service, I'm still answering the phones because it has to do with people's cases. And I understand in the criminal justice system that these cases matter to these people, because people are being locked up. You know, some people, they're victims. They may be like asking the judge, did they get my letter? I don't want this person to be out, or something like that. And that's important. But the thing is that I'm not gonna be in the right space if I'm not having a schedule to put get all these things done, because I'm going to be focused on getting all these things done, and I'm going to be kind of like very short and curt with people. I have been that way sometimes, and I notice that about myself. I've gotten so far off topic. Like I said, this topic is about gossiping, but the whole point of this is that I have a routine of how I get things done. And so usually, like when I go downstairs and I talk to the clerks, it's usually around something work related. And yeah, like I said, it is important to have workplace relationships with people. You know, like I remember when I get there early, there was always like these two guys that were down there because they live like far out. They have to commute from very far, so they have to get here early so that they can beat the traffic. And I remember we were having a discussion about politics at one point, and it was a productive conversation. It wasn't like, you know, like a heated discussion. It's like me as a young person asking questions of older people about certain things. And, you know, we have productive conversations, but I also realize, okay, like it's when I look at my phone and I'm like, okay, it's like almost 8 o'clock and I start seeing other people trickling in and I'm like, okay, I need to find some time to kind of find a point to kind of break away and go back upstairs. So it's very important to be social, but also watching those conversations. You know, especially if there's like office politics, which is going to happen anywhere. And I'm just going to be honest with you, you cannot avoid office politics. You know, there's also, you have to avoid like learning how to deflect certain conversations. And one of the things I realize is that sometimes I feel like maybe I don't speak up as much about a lot of things. Because I had a coworker who I remember she and I I think we went to go get like Starbucks or something. And I remember her talking about like how like the elevator was not, you couldn't go through this one place to get through the elevator. She said, oh, we have to take the elevator with other people. And that kind of threw me off. And I remember I was talking to my dad about that. I'm like, that kind of turned me off a little bit, you know, and I still like this person, I still hang out with this person. But I realized like my dad was saying, well, you know, it's not rude to point that out. It's kind of like questioning, like, what do you mean with other people? And I was like, well, I probably could have better addressed the issue that way. So, and I've kind of gotten past it. And so it's not really a big deal. It's just someone just making a comment that I just kind of didn't really fundamentally agree with. And I just stayed silent. I probably should have said something. Not like something like, oh, you shouldn't say that, you know, because I realized in the process when I was thinking about it, I was like, Jazz, you have tendencies to be judgmental sometimes. You have issues of your own. And so someone making a comment like that shouldn't bother you so much or turn you off as much because, again, you have your own issues. So it kind of got to a point where I made peace with that. I understood that, and I decided that because I know who this person is and I've been around her long enough, is that, you know, that doesn't affect who she is as a person, and I still enjoy my time with her. So it really, when you really think about it, you know, I had to learn to kind of not let my judgmental thoughts, because I feel like sometimes this is kind of part of, I think it kind of breeds off of gossiping, is judgments, because sometimes we might project judgments about other people. And I feel like sometimes I've had to catch myself when I make judgmental thoughts, because, you know, especially like one of the things that are very, like some of the typical topics is like, for example, motherhood. You know, like a lot of times you might have where moms are just judging each other about how they parent their own children, and, you know, and, you know, talking about like them. And I remember reading Brene Brown's book earlier this year. It was called I Thought It Was Just Me, but it wasn't. And it was a really relatable book about how, like, part of her research in shame and women is that, you know, is that we have this tendency to judge one another, but we're all going through the same thing. You know, we all have these kinds of situations. Like, I know for me, I'm going to be honest with you guys, because I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. Based on, you know, my, you know, upbringing, is that I've noticed over time that I can be kind of elitist. You know, I mean, and it's not like I'm discriminating against anyone. And I understand from a perspective of, you know, being a believer of Christ, is that we're not supposed to judge others. Even Jesus says that, you know, before you point out the speck in someone else's eye, you should look at the log in your own eye. And so sometimes when I'm thinking these thoughts, I'm like, Jazz, you need to check yourself. You know, and I feel like, I guess, I don't know. I kind of was thinking about this today, earlier today when I was going somewhere. And I realized, you know, I feel like sometimes I'm more self-aware than I think that I am, because I constantly, like I said, this is why I started, you know, transitioning this channel into this, because I have a lot of thoughts, internal thoughts, where I'm, you know, I'm aware of certain things, and I'm just kind of trying to see if anyone else kind of has the similar thoughts. Because I feel like I am very self-aware, because over time I'm noticing certain patterns about myself. It's easy to notice patterns about other people, like, oh, why do you always talk about this? Or why are you always doing this? And I always hate that. But it's like, when you look at yourself, it's like, are there things that you don't like about yourself? Because I know in theory, things that we don't like about ourselves, we don't like in other people. So it's like, if you talk on and on like nonsense, or you're gossipy, there's a chance that you might even be just the slightest bit of a gossiper, because people, like I said, people don't like in other people what they don't like in themselves. That's why people bully people, because they're a lot of times they're dealing with internal issues, you know. Or I remember even growing up dealing with bullying, and part of it was I wasn't like physically bullied, like, you know, someone being like, hey, give me your lunch money, but it was like kind of like a social isolation kind of thing. And it was mainly where I remember hearing someone saying like, Jazz, like, I don't know why she started this website about this, and, you know, like, I don't know what that is all about. You know, it's like, again, that's gossiping and judgment together. And a lot of times I feel like, you know, I mean, I realize, like, when I look back on my childhood, as much as I tried to run away from my home state, my home city, is that when I came back, I realized that I was running away from the fact that people, yeah, I did things. There are a lot of people that I went to school with who would have loved to kind of do what I am doing. And I have to be grateful for that. You know, like for me, one of the things I really don't understand is, like, I am from Kentucky. And I remember when I was getting my taxes done, I was with my accountant, and I said, I was 23 at the time. And he said, so you're filing single, right? Like, are you still filing single? I'm like, I was like, I'm 23. I'm too young to get married. And he said, you do realize you're in Kentucky. And I know, like, there are classmates who are married, you know, who've been married for, you know, at some point, you know, earlier on, and they have kids. And I know one of my old high school classmates, she is actually getting ready to have her second kid. And sometimes I catch myself and I realize that, like, Jazz, of course, I feel like sometimes when I have those thoughts, those judgmental thoughts, it's not because I look down upon someone who decides to get married young in their 20s and, you know, decides to have children. And that's not the issue. It's just that for me, I feel like sometimes when it comes to that, it's like, you know, it's like projecting almost. It's like, I would never want to, I'm just glad that that's not me, or something like that. I was telling my parents that when they told me, it's like, yeah, I ran into so-and-so and they're about to have a second kid. I was like, I'm just glad it's not me. Good for you, but not for me. And it's like I said, I realized I'm not looking down on that person because they're married with kids and they're in their 20s. This person's actually like the same age as me. But the thing is, I'm just not in a place where that's not my life goal, or that's not a plan that I have for myself. And, you know, I don't believe that I should be married in my 20s. I am not planning on having any children until I'm 30, because part of it was my experience as being an au pair. I realized that I love children, but I'm not ready to give up my freedom just yet with, you know, having to, you know, shift. I'm very selfish right now. Like, I'm selfish. I'm focusing on me, you know, and so I'm not ready to kind of give over that selfishness to, you know, to take care of someone else right now. I'm not in a position, you know. And so I realized that, you know, like, when I look at those judgmental thoughts, it's not because I look down upon that person. It's because I realize that that's not what I want for myself. But that may be what someone else wants for themselves. They want to be married. They love this person and they decide to have children with them. And that's perfectly fine, you know. And I realized that, you know, like, when we judge people for certain things, it's like that makes that person happy. You're just making judgmental thoughts based on your viewpoint. And that's something I have to, I remind myself daily, is that, remember, your viewpoint is not their viewpoint. So if someone wants to get married at 25, they can get married at 25. That's perfectly fine, you know. So I really feel like, especially when we think about gossiping, and, you know, when that goes hand in hand, you know, when we talk about people behind their back, a lot of times it has to do with judgments. You know, we're passing judgments, like, oh, like, who does that person think they are doing this? Or, I don't understand why this person does this. Or, I heard that this person's doing this, and, you know, I don't know about that, you know. Or so, you know, especially like in the church, and I'm calling some people out because, you know, like I said, this is a common typical thing in our church communities. Specifically, sometimes it's like, oh, I heard so-and-so's daughter got pregnant, I'd hate to be hurt, you know, like those kinds of negative things, because that's not constructive. And I feel like anytime we're talking about people in a way where it's not constructive, then it's not, you know, it's not productive, then, you know, we need to stop it. And the Bible actually is very clear, because I actually was doing a Bible study last night about, I was like, because like I said, I was thinking about this, and I was like, well, what does the Bible say about gossiping? I had a feeling, of course, it was going to be against it. You know, it says so. Especially when people tell you things in confidence. You know, that's the one thing, is breaking people's trust. Like if someone tells you like, hey, this is what I'm going through and please don't tell anybody else, you know, or sometimes they may not explicitly tell you don't tell people, you know, but you still, like the idea of confidentiality, you know, or if someone says, oh, I did something terrible, or this is something I hope no one finds out about, that there's basically an unspoken, you know, sense of this is something that sounds like something that I shouldn't be talking to people about, you know. And because if it gets back to, let's say you tell someone about, let's say someone confides in you, a friend says, hey, you know, I'm pregnant, my husband and I, we finally got pregnant, and we're just, don't tell anybody because we're just trying to make sure that like it's going to go, you know, because I know some people, you know, they've gone through fertility issues, or they might be going through something that they don't really want people to talk about. You know, there are a lot of things about, like, fertility is kind of like a topic that is out there, and a lot of women are talking about it in an open way so that they can connect with other women. But also at the same time, sometimes it's not something that they want to be putting on blast. And so it would be really heartbreaking for someone to say, I'm telling you not to tell someone, or I'm confiding in you in something that's confidential. And then someone else just randomly comes up to you and says, oh, hi, oh my gosh, so-and-so, I heard that you were pregnant and such and such. And it's like, I told you not to tell people. And that built this trust where people don't want to talk to you, because they're like, don't talk to so-and-so, because if you tell her anything secretive, she will tell everyone. You know, that kind of aspect. It breaks trust. And especially I feel like sometimes when we think about like issues that people have, you know, like if people have issues, like, oh, I heard so-and-so and so-and-so are getting divorced. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect you at all. You know, it's really not. And I kind of have been more conscious about that. Like when I look at conversations I've had with people at work, with friends and things like that, I have, as of now, well, not recently as of now, but you know, but basically recently in the last week or so, I've been really thinking about that topic of gossip, you know, like how it can kind of destroy trust, and how, you know, it can, I don't know, I mean, it destroys trust, and it's like sometimes it's not productive, because you're putting yourself in a position where you're talking about things you may not know anything about. And a lot of times if people are gossiping about someone, they're most likely going to gossip about you. So that, again, that goes back to a trust issue. Like, okay, like I know not to tell this person anything. And I feel like you want to be, for me, at least for me, I want to be a person where people can come and talk to, you know, about certain things. You know, I want to be a supportive person, especially when it comes to my friendships. But the thing is, my friends won't trust me if I have a reputation of telling people their business or talking about things that don't involve me. You know, and I realize a lot of times what we spend around talking about other people, you know, and other things that really don't concern us, is that's time that we could be using to be more productive, like getting work done, or I don't know. And I said, I'm not here to judge anybody. I just feel like, you know, based on what I'm aware of, and this is something I'm working on, like I said, it's just learning how to not get, you know, especially not get engaged in these kinds of conversations, because the Bible also says not to get involved with talebearers, or like basically people who, you know, like I said, gossip. So, you know, so I realized that that's something I need to work on. And I don't know if that's something that you might feel like, you know, you didn't realize you need to work on, or that you want to kind of address in yourselves. I think it's really important to be introspective and know that we're all human beings and we all make mistakes, and we have things about ourselves we're trying to work on. So I hope this encourages you, and I'd love to hear your conversations in the comments around the dinner table. So I'll see you next time. Bye.